Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week's quick build really is quick, and I'll show you that in a minute. Well, you may recall a couple of weeks ago I did the benches and installed them at Stoke Prior School, and when I was just coming away they asked if I could have a look at doing a rack for some. They got 3 or 4 pairs of wellies loose lying around, and they wondered if I could do something so they could just store them upside down to dry them out for when children came without their own wellies they could borrow some. So that's what I've done. It's a very quick build. I went back to the shed, and in the probably couple of hour and a half or so left over of the day, I put the main frame together and then brought it back here and did some more work on the supports and the caps on the ends to stop them poking their eyes out. So I'll just show you the build and see you when it's finished.
Things out then.
Right, I've got another commission now.
What's that?
They want a little stand to put the wellies on the outside.
Oh, do they?
If we did a little cross with
Oh.
a dozen sticky up bits.
Oh, right, okay.
I can probably do that while I'm waiting. Right.
Waiting for what?
Well, you know.
Christmas?
Now, back at the shed I'd found some spare, I don't know whether they were sort of spindles out of a cot or something, I don't know, but there were half a dozen or so of those which would do me. And in the pile of junk at the end of the shed, a couple of lengths of timber that somebody had already had a go at painting green. I think they're 2x4s, and it was fairly straightforward just to measure up those, find a centre point and mark out for a half housed joint. I wasn't going to go into any great carpentry skill exercises with this, but it was something that was quick and dirty just for the short term. So having found out where the middle was, I set the chop saw just so that it would cut through half depth on the timber. Use a bit of scrap just to make sure the depth was right, and then just did a series of kerf cuts just to get the depth and save a lot of messing around with chiseling out housings. And the only real thing to get right with this is to make sure that you've got the width correct for the piece of timber that's being housed in it, and that had been marked out, so it was fairly easy to do. You see me there just checking that it's the right width. I think I just had to take a little bit more out of it, and then just knock the little bits of timber over with a hammer. That all comes out fairly cleanly, and it's a fairly quick exercise then just to chisel that flat. By the time you put those two together to start with, they were about 10mm apart, I think, but a quick clean up with the chisel just to get the rough parts off. We soon got it down to the right size. A little bit of persuasion to get it to the right position, but that fell into place fairly well. I think there's a bit more to come out there, but final bit of clearing out. As I say, it's no work of art, but it's not got to do a great deal other than support half a dozen pairs of wellies. Back at the shed at home, the small shed, I marked the centre lines out for the holes that I needed to do for the pegs, and then had a play around to make sure I got the spacings about right so that I got the maximum distances apart for all of them, and then did a pilot hole with a couple of 3mm drill just to mark them out. The spindles themselves I think were 16mm, and the closest I could find with the drill was a 15mm force and a bit, but actually that proved to be about right. With a little bit of persuasion with a hammer, the spindles would go in quite nicely into that size hole without too much glue or support. There's a little bit of tape on that drill, you'll notice. There's serving two purposes. First of all, it's a depth stop. Secondly, it clears the dust away. You know when you've got down to depth, because all of a sudden all of the dust disappears off the face because it wipes it all off and kicks it out. So it was a useful way of getting the depth right. And then, although there were some small parts on the end of the spindles that were where they'd been put into a previous framework, I think, so I cut those off with the little Japanese pull saw, and then cut the spindles in half so that the half dozen spindles would do me. Then I took about a 50mm hole drill. I didn't want them to be dangerous in having sticking up spikes that were, if anyone fell against them, would hurt them. So I just put a small 50mm cap on the end of each spindle. That's just basically the centre part of the hole drill, with another 15mm recess in the back, and driven onto the end of the timber and then screwed on. Screwed the two cross pieces together just to hold them firm, and then proceeded to glue all the uprights into position. So a little persuasion with the rubber mallet, and they all went in nice and firm. I think the whole thing took about a couple of hours overall. It took me about an hour in the morning that I'd got left at Menning Sheds, and then in the afternoon I spent an hour or so just doing these bits. I'd fortunately got some green paint that matched the base that was left over from the shed build itself, so I just gave the top pieces and the cross piece coat of paint just to tidy it up and keep the weather out of it a bit. I think the biggest difficulty of the whole job was working around the spindles. It would probably have been easier to paint the whole thing green, but actually painting around the bases was a bit of a faff, but we got there in the end. Just wiped the surplus off. They were already pre-varnished, so they should be pretty good in the outside weather. Make sure the underneath was painted, because it will be sitting on the ground outside, I expect. But then once that was dry, that was pretty much it. It was a finished job, ready to go off to the school, and I dropped it off the following week for them, and once again I think they're happy with it. So there we are, something quick and simple this week. Hope you enjoyed the build. Hopefully it will be of use to them at the school as well, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.